Record. Yay! Okay.
Should we run it back real quick?
Yeah. No, because they
Ew.
don't need to know who I am. We're gonna go ahead and start with you. Your
I
name,
see.
your role at FYP, and your favorite Merienda.
Yeah, so my name is Gerren Sayco. I'm the current president of FYP for this year of 2024. And what I brought for Merienda, I mean, it's not traditionally Filipino, but in honor of Cinco de Mayo, I'm not sure if I can share this. Let me blur my screen really quickly. But I got nachos. So that is yeah, right here. I devoured a little bit. I got impatient, but yeah, it's chorizo nachos in honor of the holiday coming up.
Right. And I'm Brian Flores. Pronouns are he, him, his. I didn't bring a Merienda today. Oh, by the way, I'm Vice President FYP. I didn't bring Merienda today. I did celebrating not Cinco de Mayo, but the Kentucky Derby tomorrow. I had a mint julep right after I closed down, so I had that. But my favorite Merienda, if I were to bring one, would have been my I like to use a spiraler for pineapples and put tahini on it. That's my jam.
All right, I guess it's up to me. Kamusta kaayo? Ako si Gabriel or Gabe, he, his pronouns, and I am FYP secretary, and where I also do a little bit of programming as well. And so, what I brought from Merienda today is, as I was starting off in Cebuano a few seconds ago, is straight from my trip from Cebu this past week, is Cebuano dried mango, straight from SM Seaside City, from Cebu City. But also, shout out to GWPCS because we also do little meriendas as well. But I got some chocolate from them too because mangoes are sometimes good dipped in chocolate, but also just eaten with chocolate. So, wanting to make sure I covered all the palettes I was craving. But yeah, I'll popcorn it back to you, Regina.
That's amazing. Chalk nut is one of the most underrated foods, I think, in Filipino culture. And recently I found out, or I had a chocolate croissant at Hiraya at the Sun and Stars, like the cafe. And they have a chocolate croissant and they actually use chalk nut in it. It is so good. So if you can make it over to Hiraya, which is founded by my good friend Paolo Dunca, who is also, like, we did a lot of the interviews for the film there. You should go check it out and have their chalk nut croissant because it's amazing. They also have a Milo cake. It's like a layer meal crepe cake with Milo and Milo cream, and that is also amazing. Like all of these Filipino flavors that we have access to now, really, really warm my heart. So I guess I wanted to start with, what is FYP? And like, what is your mission as an organization? And how did you each, like, why are each of you a part of it?
Yeah, so as a breakdown of FYP from a high level overview, we are a nonprofit organization that operates underneath four pillars in terms of the events that we have per month, per year. And those four pillars include professional development, social, share community, as well as, I know I'm missing one. It's cultural as well. So that falls underneath all of our umbrellas. We try to have at least 2 to 3 events per month that kind of hits one of those pillars. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm very passionate. I guess we all are here about building community within the DMV area. A lot of our community isn't necessarily from this area, so we try to make like a home away from home, essentially. Like I'm originally from New Jersey. Brian is from the Bay Area, so is Gabe. So DC is very transient, and we just want to welcome everyone here with open arms when it comes to them going here for college. They come here for work. They want to get a fresh take on the East Coast, anything like that.
So, yeah, I think that's a great point. It's like actually being from the West Coast, maybe Gabe. By the way, I'm from LA, lived in the Bay. I like to clarify that. But I think one of the things that when we live on the West Coast, we tend to kind of take for granted like how available the Filipino community is. And so when I came out here, I kind of found myself in a situation where I was like, oh, I think I kind of miss my Filipino community, whether I had it with my own friends or my family. And so it just was actually recommended upon me by actually a Thai friend who says, you know, you should do the Lapu-Lapu boat, the boat race. And so I sought out that particularly because I wanted to get active and do something uniquely like DC, racing dragon boats on the Potomac. And then I just showed up to these events, and increasingly I just found myself more involved. And I think that's just kind of what happens, when you get into the Filipino community, you feel so welcomed, and you feel like you've always been there, or you should have been there, and you just start running for office and doing the programming for everyone.
On a similar vein to what Gerren mentioned, that FYP's community isn't just professionals as well. We heavily intake students. So my story in FYP actually started when I was over at George Washington University as a freshman, where FYP was such a strong partner of GW's Philem org called the Philippine Cultural Society. And FYP would usually ask PCS for help, considering that FYP's founders were all GW PCS alumni, whether that be Randy Lazardo, Rodney Salinas, Mike Reyes, Marlon. All of them started up FYP as an avenue to transition from undergrad into the professional realm. And so coming into GW, it allowed me to kind of see myself in a community in this diaspora where here in DC, I still consider the United States, similar as GW, as a predominantly white institution, that it allowed me to have my own barangay in a sense where I can feel as I am at home, and that I can look up to mentors for professional career advice as a student and help me with my own career. And so ever since as a freshman at GW, I've been a part of FYP, although I will admit, not as a paying member, but as a student who can at least be around other professionals and see what life could look like after I graduate. And so I graduated from GW last May, and as I transitioned from student into professional, I made sure that I applied immediately for FYP board to continue that cycle of service that I was imbued with, and to help future students find their own place in the PWI that is DC.
That's amazing. I appreciate that that phrase you just used, cycle of service. And I'm gonna steal that, so thank you. But I'm very fascinated with the differences between the East and the West Coast. Culturally, we do have different types of access. Gerren, you're from New Jersey, but your proximity to New York and even the New Jersey community, it's larger than here in DC. But there has been a Filipino community here in DC for over 100 years. And there's a lot of really interesting Filipino history, not just Filipino American history, but Filipino history, government history that is rooted here in Washington, DC, that I certainly didn't learn in school. So I have a couple of questions going in that direction, but I did have a question for you and Brian in terms of, like, because you come from the Bay, because you come from California, where there is so much more access to culture, were you involved in activist or collective organizing before FYP or before coming to DC?
Sorry, I was on. No, so I would say this. I was adjacent to it. I wasn't necessarily being the person organizing events, but I was always close enough going to UC Berkeley with PAA, the different organizations there. And then just kind of even coming down to LA after college, getting plugged into the UCLA, their program. So I was always close to it, kind of had my pulse on it, but I wasn't nearly as much of an activist per se. And so I kind of found it interesting to come here, and I'm like, oh, I'm running for something, because that's not something I would have thought about doing, because there were just so many people doing it, and I felt like they've been doing it for a long time. That being said, there are a lot of organizations, whether they're oriented to getting people or young Filipinos into colleges or just getting involved politically, that you have access to. It's just more like, I think for me personally, I was like, well, I have my family and my friends. Like, I don't need to seek like politically like centric or like social service centric types of organizations. And so that's kind of what's interesting about being here on this side. It's like now I am, because I feel less of it in my day-to-day life.
I'd say for me, it was very different. So I grew up in San Jose, California, albeit I was a military kid. So I was actually born in Germany, then moved to New Mexico. But wherever I was, my family would always have their own Phil Am community group. So when my family was stationed in Ramstein, Germany, although I was 1, 2 years old, we were a part of the Air Force's Phil Am. Before they called them ERGs, it was just a community group where in the larger Pan Asian scene. And so that was always imbued with me. Additionally, in San Jose, my family was huge in the community organizing and activist scene. So we emigrated from the Philippines in the 80s due to the economic instability that was caused from the Marcos regime. And my grandfather really disliked Marcos Sr. And because of that, he not only started up sort of resistance groups in San Jose, but also wanted to make sure that those who felt that economic instability, especially immigrants, were able to be taken care for. And so he started up the first Santa Clara County Phil Am Chamber of Commerce. And so, with that being my family's background, I've always just been around public service as a military kid. My mom also was in the DoD for US Air Force Europe, but it wasn't until high school where going into a predominantly white Jesuit high school, transitioning away from a huge Phil Am Vietnamese American community out in San Jose was where I first experienced racism and discrimination, where I was a part of the leadership team for our Phil Am student organization, and we do the Santo Niño celebration. And I had a white colleague who came up to me when I was dancing Maglalatik, the coconut dance, and he straight up asked me what I was doing. I was like, oh, I'm doing this coconut Filipino dance, and he straight up goes, sorry to say, but that's hella gay, bro. And that was really one of the turning points of my where I woke up in a sense and realized that, I want to make sure that no one has to go through that. That if the Jesuits are imbuing me with a mindset of being a man formed with others of service and solidarity, I need to carry that forward. So doing that was just heavily involved in starting up the DEIA program at my high school, where 54% of the population was white, and making sure that we can celebrate our differences. But also, my mom was huge in TFC and ABS-CBN. So I used to MC for ABS-CBN and TFC's Pistahan, the largest Phil-Am Fest west of the Mississippi in SF, and used to interact and mingle with artistas on the day-to-day basis. So shameless plug, you can catch me on TFC, part of the TFC under 30, and talking about how big TFC was to me. And so always just was inspired by my grandfather's legacy of service, but also just wanting to make sure that there is so much hate and discrimination in the world, but how can I play into that, provide the space of safety and security for those who are living in an unknown land to them.
That was, yeah, really, really like awesome to hear that, Gabe. I didn't even know that. And I sit with you weekly and talk to you a lot. I'm glad you said that, actually, because I actually wanted to bring up the fact, and I think this will help me clarify. So growing up in California, in SoCal, it's so easy to be around people that look like you and go to school. And especially in elementary and like the outer sides, like let's say call the suburbs of LA, West Covina, Chino Hills, Diamond Bar. These are cities that are kind of like thrown out. And it's, you go to high school and you're largely in classes with like Latinos, Filipinos, and it's very normal. And then you go to a school like UC Berkeley, which is supposed to reflect, which was, shout out to all the Cal Bears that listen, but it's supposed to, yeah, they're you too. But it's supposed to be, these public universities are supposed to be representative of the California constituency. And then you find out you actually grossly over-index for your, so those are the things that you're made aware of. Like, oh, you're Asian too, but then you're seen differently by like Far East Asian groups. And you tend yourself, like I feel more in common like with Latino communities sometimes growing up in California. And that's kind of something that I think is unique. I don't know if that perception or that kind of like self-identification happens as much on the East Coast with like Latinos gravitating towards Filipinos and vice versa, but it's a very common thing on the other side of the country.
No, I definitely agree with you, Brian. Like even for me, a majority of my elementary, middle school class, it was Latina, Vietnamese American, or Phil Am, and so we were always just what we call is like the red line zone or like East Side San Jose of like just people who are suffering and whatnot. And like even it's hard for me too because like over despite being surrounded by a huge Phil Am community out on the West Coast, because I'm light skinned, a lot of people even didn't assume I was Phil Am, and so there was that sense of having to prove it to them and causing me to undergo identity crisis of being Filipino and whatnot. So like even coming here to the East Coast, taking those experiences where, you know, like we all know we're discriminated against, but it's like identifying where and finding that sense of belonging is again what really drives me, at least in from my student organizing days, but also to here to really emphasize like here in FYP that it doesn't matter if you're an immigrant, doesn't matter if you're mixed, doesn't matter if you even consider yourself whitewashed or whatnot, that you at least know that you have a place in a community here because again, as Brian was saying, that the blood that runs through your veins makes you Filipino, and it's that community that matters no matter where you are at. And I think that's kind of the unique West Coast experience that it comes and brings, where we know that on the East Coast it's a lot more, let's say, not as diverse or like huge Phil Am ethnic enclaves are, but that ethnic enclave mindset to provide that barangay for people is super important.
Gerren, I don't want to leave you out. I know that you're not from California, but where in Jersey are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Monmouth County, like Asbury Park, Jersey Shore area, like
Okay.
more North Shore. But I guess like a little part about where I grew up, there used to be this huge naval base. That's where my grandparents, or that's actually how my parents met when they were kids. Because both of my grandparents were in the Navy. They got their U.S. citizenship during Vietnam, and they actually ended up meeting at the same base, Fort Monmouth, growing up, and they just were family friends. And my sister and I pop out, but growing up, I joke around about this a lot. I was raised by a lot of Italians, so when I hear Jersey or like I talk with my hands sometimes, there wasn't necessarily a lot of Filipino community there. Um, I guess the best way I can describe it is that there was about 5 Asian Americans in my grade, and that's out of 350. Um, and then all the Filipinos that I've met up until college were my immediate family. So when I first moved here, I'm making new friends with, Gabe, Brian, the rest of my board, Andre, and Regine, and that was very eye-opening to me. Where it's like I'm not that one, token Filipino kid. That's that one out of the 5 other white dudes. Um, and also just a little culture shock as well, going to a Filipino restaurant. I never. Oh yeah, and Kirk. Yes, I did. I didn't forget Kirk. Thanks for the reminder. But yeah, even just going to a Filipino restaurant like Purple Patch, Kaliwa, like so many other ones too. It's something that a lot of people take for granted at the end of the day, and I'm very grateful that the DMV can be a home for us here.
It's really beautiful, the diversity of experience just between the three of you, that it really, and it also illuminates the fact that there is no one way to be Filipino, but it's that Filipino identity that connects us all. And I'm deeply interested in this idea of how we uplift that identity without gatekeeping it. You are all making an inclusive space with FYP, welcoming different identities, different intersections into Filipino-ness. And I think that is so important because, one of the things that you had mentioned, Gabe, about colorism is something that I experience. I'm very tall for a woman in general, but for a Filipino woman, I am extremely tall. I am taller than most of the men in my family. I'm taller than most Filipino women and men that I ever meet. And they automatically assume that I am not Filipino or that I am mixed, and I'm not. Both of my parents are from there. And I just did a 23andMe, and I'm so excited about it. Like I'm not somebody who is like, I don't think that percentage or blood proves access or it means that you can claim ownership of an identity. But when I am already occupying the Filipino identity and trying to embrace that as much as possible as a first generation Filipino American who has always been, I've always lived on the hyphen. Like, it sounds like the three of you have always been hyphenated Americans as well. We are in between cultures. And it's difficult being Filipino American here because we are American, but we don't look like what people think Americans are. And then when we go to the Philippines, we're not Filipino because we were not raised there. We don't speak the language. We weren't taught the history. A lot of the cultural things, the jokes, the humor, a lot of things we don't get. So we're on the outside of that as well. How do we as Filipino Americans here uplift each other while embracing the diversity, while also pushing back on this idea that like there is only one way to be Filipino? Because I just did my 23andMe, and my DNA says that I am 70% indigenous Filipino from central Luzon, like not from Mindanao, not from the Philippine Islands in general, but is very specific to being central Luzon and like Bicol, Sorsogon, where my grandparents are from. And like that, I had no idea how much that would give me a sense of relief, because I now know that like my ancestry is tied to a land. And I didn't realize that I was missing that until I had like the proof that I have like 4 or 5 generations of family members who are from a place, like, so it's the interesting thing about Filipinos, and so much of our identity, what unifies us is that we are so diasporic, we are so tribal, we are so separated. But at the same time, we really love being Filipino.
Yep.
Whether the Filipino identity or community loves us back. And that's such an interesting thing. Like, it's interesting hearing, like, Gerren, I know, like, there's a big Filipino community in New Jersey, but not the part of Jersey that you're from, right? And like, where I grew up, it sounds like I had more Filipinos around me, even though I was in a very white area for a long time. And then but at the same time, like, I listened to Brian, your experience with, having the Mexican culture around you and like the Latinx community around you. And you have like decades of labor solidarity
Mhm.
and like the same experiences of othering and racism that like unifies those cultures, and not even bringing up the fact that we were colonized by the same people.
Mhm.
But you have a very unique identity, and at the same time, like, you are Filipino and love being Filipino, right? So like,
Absolutely, yeah.
so what I was going to ask you, like, what generation you all are, like, in terms of like, how tied to American culture you feel based, like, what generation are you, I guess, is like in terms of immigration.
So technically, right, my dad would be first generation because he immigrated here, technically, right?
No,
That's
he's the immigrant, so you would be first generation.
so I'm first generation. Okay. I've always understood it different. Like whoever touched ground first would be the first generation. But
Yeah, I'm
so
same with Brian, where
Oh, okay.
that's how I was taught. But because I define it through the US Census, where the census says that the first person to touch down is first gen.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of so I would say in my sense, my dad was the first to touch ground, right? And he, I mean, to put it to you like this, he came here, I think, because of the instability that was happening, kind of the fraying of society, like the political like arena that was happening towards the like, Marcos's regime, martial law. My Lola at the time said, like, you don't have an opportunity here. And my dad came to the States on an extended visa, became undocumented. His as did my Lolo. My Lola went back because he was suffering from cancer. My Lola made the conscious decision not to tell my dad that my Lola was dying of cancer because my mom was pregnant with me. And so and my mom is El Salvadoran. So regardless, that's a whole other story. But what I'm saying is my family had to make decisions to tell my dad not to come back home and bury his own dad because it would risk losing his opportunity to stay in the United States and be a father to his son. That said, my dad has become a contract. He's a contractor or subcontractor on depending on the contract. And so often that, he goes through to other countries serving the United States and America, and different military people go to his people that report to him, my own dad, and think that his direct reports are his lead. And that's the othering that he has to deal with all the time. And it's upsetting. I could hear it in his voice when he says it. For me, I'm first generation. I'm taking advantage of the opportunities that are ahead of me, but it's also meant a lot of things. Assimilation. It's meant that I didn't learn the language. It's meant that as years go by, I feel maybe decades. If I don't go back enough on a trip to the Philippines, I feel kind of like, oh, it's getting further away from me. So that's the risk that I feel like we run. But I do like being close to people, like being in this organization, talking to people, talking to family members. It keeps me close. It keeps me close to it all. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, so I guess I need some more clarification on my end in terms of what generation. So it's the first person to touch American soil, get their citizenship. That is the first gen.
According to the US Census.
Okay. Okay, yeah, because kind of rewinding it back, both my grandpas, they served in the Navy during Vietnam. That's how they got their US citizenship. And my parents were born here in the States on naval bases. My mom was born in Florida, and my dad was born in Rhode Island. And then my sister and I born here. So I guess I've always like identified as Filipino, but from like an outside perspective, what was it, the perpetual foreigner like kind of bias, that has really been like a huge like a factor of how I perceive the world nowadays, especially since it kind of got a little bit smaller during COVID-19, the whole Stop Asian Hate was going on. Because I thought that, it's like, oh, I'm Filipino, and then I never really gravitated or try to make, efforts to, I guess, be a part of my community. Because like, oh, I have my family. I know adobo. I know this. I know that. But then walking around during that time period, I remember I was at a house party back in college, and the guy was like, "Oh, where are you from?" And you know how that goes. I was like, "Oh, I'm from Monmouth County." He goes, "No, like, where are you really from?" Asbury Park area, like Jersey Shore. It's like, "No, you know what I mean?" I'm like, "No, I don't." And I kept like kind of like pushing him, and he's like, "All right, where's your family from? Or where are your parents from?" And then I kind of like spread it even. I was like, "My mom was born in Florida, my dad's born in Rhode Island. What are you talking about?" And then he was like, "All right, ethnically speaking, what country is your family from?" I'm like, "All right, that's a good question. I can answer that question now." So it really is just like, I guess even though I am a third generation American, on the outside, it's kind of like a weird middle ground, like you mentioned.
So for me, I have a weird experience as well. So technically, I am a second gen Phil Am because both of my parents immigrated. My mom when she was freshman year of high school, my dad when he was in middle school. And however, because I was a military kid, I was born in Germany overseas. And so I was surrounded by base culture for most of my life. So technically, I say kind of by experience, I'm like first gen-ish because I immigrated when I was two to the US. But what was weird about my experience as well was I had this huge identity conflict growing up because being light skinned, it was hard for me to necessarily fit in with the Fil-Am community because no one would assume that I was Filipino. And so I remember vividly, I was at a Chuck E. Cheese's in New Mexico at Kirtland Air Base, and this Japanese American family comes up to me and goes, "Excuse me, are you Japanese?" Like, and they were super excited, wanting to get their kid to play with me. I was like, "No, I'm Filipino." And growing up, I always thought that I was like Filipino. I wasn't Fil-Am. I was just Filipino. And I think that was even exasperated by living in the Bay Area, where I was surrounded by the Fil-Am population for most of my life. And so I immediately assumed that, again, culturally, I'm Filipino, especially that I'm quote unquote first gen in my mind. But it wasn't until I really came over here to the East Coast, where I was away from the Fil-Am community from the West Coast, where I realized that, wait a second, the Fil-Am culture and identity is so different. That, similar as you were saying, Ate, where even as I mentioned, I just came from the Philippines last week. It made me realize that, again, I'm not Filipino, but I'm also not American. I'm a true third culture kid, and the Filipino American identity is what I've eventually accepted, but that I don't fit in anywhere. And it's kind of caused, I will say, even I'm sitting with it now, a new identity crisis within me, where I try to communicate to folks, and when I help them on their own identity exploration, that yes, it is definitely important to be proud of who you are, despite how messed up the Philippines is, despite how messed up the US is. It's so important because as third culture people, it's so easy for us to feel lost, but that feeling of being lost is also one that unites us because no one else understands that except us. And so by bonding over, I don't want to even just say bonding, but like kind of trauma bonding around it and being in solidarity with one another, it creates that understanding that no one else can have and that experience, and allows us to create this new identity. And one interesting statistic I love tooting out, especially in my day job, I work for the government, is by 2050, it's estimated that our PWI country will soon that whites will be the minority, with people of color being the majority. And so us as the next generation, and recognizing that third culture, we are literally creating the new American identity as we are figuring these things out. And so as we do that right now, it's so important that we recognize that we are knowing history to know ourselves, in a sense. Hashtag Jose Rizal.
That's, um, I was just thinking about kind of like one of the things that kind of what I love, and I think how we as like Fil-Ams try to retain our culture. I think I've had to look at it. It's like we look at our titas, our lolas, titos, and it's always come, 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 hang out, have food, or just always come, come. There's always a reason to come, and like it's like very much open door policy. You're going there, you're seeing some of your cousins there, and people are leaving, and I really like that's a like people are coming and going is what I'm saying, and I love that, and I think I kind of want FYP to be that same place, just like come, we want anyone, if you just want to come and eat with us, break bread with us, or like, it's like I think that's a great way of how we retain our culture and our identity in ways. It's just to continuously have this place where we're coming in and welcoming people, and not necessarily, it's going to be different than I think other cultures, and saying like, you have to be this, and it's not us. Like, I don't think that culturally we're like that. We're such a mix of people already, just by like nature of being Filipino. But I think people start to say like, oh, they're kind people, they're welcoming. They like, I get to like, because of that, I want to partake in your culture. I was just kind of seeing what happened, for instance, at George W. this past weekend, where there was a technical difficulty. And so they did, just to keep things going, they did a tinkling dance, and they're like, everyone, I saw so many non-Filipinos just learning how to do, not like to the level which Gabe choreographs things, but they love that about our culture. It's so welcoming. Come and learn it. And I think that's one of the things that we got really going well for us, regardless of like how many generations we go deep into this like experience being past the Philippine Islands.
Another thing I want to add that Brian was mentioning in creating belonging and being secure in identity as well as a third culture kid is especially that Phil-Am history is so unique in the sense of being the first Asian Americans here, and then also that we have literally been on the journey of civil rights, whether it be the Delano Manongs or even our Filipino veterans getting the Congressional Gold Medal for their service in World War II. That all of this history is so present, but still it's not taught to us. And so as Phil-Ams, we are always searching for that sense of belonging, despite us always being the ones who are making people belonged or feeling welcome in that sense. And so, kind of how I put it is that, again, as third culture kids, because we know what it means to not feel welcome in a space, we transform that trauma into something positive to make sure that people feel welcome. That we are, as your documentary is, we are those faith healers in that sense of making sure that that faith in an unknown land can be healed over time with that trauma being recognized and eventually being transformed into that new barangay that I was mentioning earlier.
I love the barangay. I love that just the imagery and the, you know, the new barangay. That's really great. You all said so much that really is in alignment with so many of the things that we cover in the film, because it seems, you know, the issues and the experiences that we have as Filipinos, regardless if we're, you know, the immigrants or we're second or third generation, it seems that there are issues that stay with us, even though the culture around us shifts. They continue to stick with us, and not just within America at large, right? Not with just being, you know, a Southeast Asian minority within the AANHPI identity of America, like not having East Asian privilege, and but also, you know, not being really seen as, and also like intersecting with Latinx culture and like all of those different things, the complexities that the Filipino identity innately has. We do have struggles with invisibility within American culture at large, but I'd like to talk about you like, and you have all enumerated the Filipino trait of like kapwa and the sense of community, the sense of recognizing each other's shared identity. And that really is just, I think, a lovely way of saying humanity, that we always recognize the humanity in other people, and that's why we are compassionate. Please don't apologize for looking down. I'm constantly taking notes to make sure that I know exactly what to go back to, because you're constantly saying fascinating things, and I want to go back and cover things because they're so important that we talk about it as a culture, especially I think within this demographic, within the younger millennial, reaching down into the Gen Z culture, because a lot of these traits, we look at things like, I want to talk about crab mentality. I want to talk about the negative traits that stick within our culture because they are so pervasive. And I used to think that it was just, oh, it's the elders. And that was it was scarcity mindset. It was survival. And I'm finding that it is within the Gen X and millennial culture as well. That that Filipinos like to be cliquish, that Filipinos like to, you know, and it's very frustrating to me, because then when we start moving away from solidarity and moving towards competition within our own community, it makes it harder for all of us to move forward in any way. And like, even I say this all the time in every conversation that I have with Filipinos, and it drives me nuts that like I say it all the time, because I feel like how is this repetition like any good? Is it really that relevant? But like, people complain about how other folks make adobo. People criticize other people's sinigang. People criticize restaurants, and like, and I talk to Filipino chefs all the time because I love food. My dad was a chef. I eat as like, and like I want to support Filipinos who bring restaurants forward, because I didn't grow up with Filipino restaurants around here, and now we have so many. But every Filipino chef that I know says that they're not cooking for the community anymore, because it's actually the community that is the most critical of the food that they make. And that it is titas, it is your own people that will look at your sinigang or your kare-kare, and they will be like, this isn't right. My family doesn't make it that way. I don't put this in there. It does, and to take that information and put it on Yelp. So then people who are not within the community do I have a bad connection? Can you hear me?
No, you're good.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly
Okay,
fine.
great.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Brian. But like, then people who are coming and learning about Filipino food are reading these reviews, and they're like, oh, I shouldn't eat there. I should not eat this place because an actual Filipino said that this wasn't good and it's not real Filipino food. What is real Filipino? Who gets to gatekeep our identity? Who gets to gatekeep our food when we are people who come from a nation that is made up of over 7,000 islands and speaks over 180 different languages? And 4,000 Filipinos leave the Philippines to go work globally every single day. So I'd love to talk to you about that. Like when you were talking about, doing tinikling at Tandaan, that's what it was, right? Tandaan. And inviting people in. Like, I loved that idea of like sharing the culture, but do you find that people want to share our culture with non-Filipinos more than they want to share our culture with actual Filipinos? Because no one can agree what our culture is. Please, Gabe, it sounds like Gabe has a lot to say.
Hello, friend in the back. All right, so I'm gonna be really honest, and I know this is live and everything, but there was one point in my life, I deliberately remember when in high school, but I hated being Filipino. And whatever college essay I can pull up now, or even my grad school application essays, you will see that I literally write about how much I hate being Filipino, and I hated it so much because, and I do use sometimes hate in the present tense because, as you hinted at, our community, sorry to say, our community is toxic, and we all carry so much with us. One of my mentors, Andrew Chow from Boba Guys, like the Boba Chain New York, he gave me this phrase that helped me understand this mindset from the Taiwanese American perspective of hurt people hurt people. And recognizing that and this crab mentality, it made me realize that, again, the discrimination and racism that we all are facing is an externalization towards other people as well, that because we feel that we have to fit into the square that we were created for us here, let alone that, again, first gen and second gen, especially the waves of immigration for the Phil-Am community is so different that it's so hard to even pinpoint on what exactly is the Phil-Am identity or community. And going back to my personal experience of why I even hated it was I constantly remember the constant infighting in my own family and household growing up. I remember the family drama and my friends' drama in being in a dominantly Phil-Am middle school where I would get bullied by other kids who I thought were my community. I would see parents exclude each other. And even for me, it really developed into a depression and severe anxiety that I was diagnosed with, and that was even compounded in high school. And so I didn't really come to terms with my identity until it was even during the COVID pandemic, I will say, because when I even came to GW, I had such a huge identity crisis where, as an example, being a hurt person hurting other people and me telling people like, oh, I'm Filipino, I'm not Phil-Am, because Phil-Ams just get pissed off at every single thing and love advocating for anything that doesn't align with them. That was me running away, but it was really even me not getting a leadership position in my own Phil-Am org that caused me to make me rethink myself of like, do I really belong in this community and organization if I'm not even accepted as a leader? And it caused me to go to my other side. So again, being Chinoy, I'm like Filipino, Chinese, Spanish American, everything that colonized the Philippines, if you will. it made me go towards those other groups and look at my community from the outside in and confuse myself even further of how can these other Asian ethnic groups be so patient with each other when we ourselves are constantly fighting with each other. And I'm not saying in a general sense that every other community is perfect, but more so of each of us and our own families carry our own unique stories, but because of that history of colonization, that other countries haven't had that relationship with America, that our treatment here is so different to the point that our mentalities have also been shaped in a sense. And so, um, when I went home during the COVID pandemic and really had to sit with myself, I joined all these Phil-Am nonprofits as well. I still work for Phil-Am nonprofit and out in San Jose as well. I also work for NAFA as well. And meeting these other Phil-Am leaders who were the third gen and fourth gen Phil-Ams helped me come to terms that a lot of the first gen and second gen folks are still processing how difficult immigration was, especially that for the third and fourth gens, their great grandparents are the ones who experienced that, but they can't relate anymore. So, how can we teach them to come to terms with who they are in this foreign land of sense and be proud that there's an entirely separate Phil-Am history from Filipino history and American history that we can claim pride in. And so, taking that up, that was my way of fighting that colonial mentality and the crab mentality and recognize that if I keep hurting other people, then the cycle will never end and I will continually be a perpetrator of the violence that's being caused against ourselves. And so, as I was saying, I'm a huge proud Cebuano because, in my opinion, that's one of the first instances of resistance to colonization. But mentioning those stories as well to tell people that, hey, we can pick and choose, of course, what we can be proud in, but there are so many glorious histories that our own families have overcome that it's so important to uplift that. And that's what it means to be Filipino in a sense, where Filipinos are some of the most resilient people in the entire world, and let alone that our experience as the hyphen of being Phil-Am even couples that makes us further. And my cousin in the Philippines made it even better by saying being Phil-Am is being Filipino amazing. And so taking that into consideration of wherever I go and making sure that instead of a hurt person hurting another person, that I'm a healed person healing another.
Can I have a different take on that answer? I love that, Gabe, by the way. I'm Filipino amazing. I'm gonna make sure I keep like steal that one. No, I in terms of just kind of like the idea of like, are we kind of acquiescing our culture just to make other people comfortable with it? And one of the ways maybe is through food. I'm sorry if you hear my dog barking. I just think about, I'm gonna say this. First of all, food is constantly like watered down for other, like if you think about the first instances of Americans having Chinese food or even our version of sushi, Indian food, how that like all these things have been watered down for colonials or foreigners to eat. And maybe that's the gateway to getting them into like the genuine experience. And if that's kind of like the take that like we have, or the path that we go, just to get people to understand like this is what we're gonna do for you like now, but like here's what the real stuff is, then I'm okay with it. That's just my take on it. I've always thought like Filipino food, for instance, like the way our titos titas make it, our lolas, like it just, I knew, I was like, it's never gonna take off until they introduce more like vegetables, more colors, at least in America. And the millennials, my generation, like they did that. And they started making all these restaurants that are now getting Michelin rest, you know, whether it's Chicago, New York. And I'm okay with it. Like I don't have any knock on it. And so people say it's not authentic. Well, when your tita had her business, how come you weren't supporting it then? You know, that's my point of view. So here we are. If food is kind of looking different than generations past, well, you should have supported it then at that time. And additionally, food is always changing, as is language, as is culture. So like stop gatekeeping things. Like that's just my point of view.
Yeah,
And
and
that's just my point of view, at least.
yeah, and just to piggyback off of that too, it's funny how people tend to like, oh, you put this in your adobo, that you put this in your sinigang. There's no like set recipe book for Filipino food. Like I asked my grandma, how do I make this? And it's all by feel, it's all by taste, it's all about preference. You know, there's not actually, they don't have a measuring cup of how much soy sauce they use. They eyeball everything. So it tastes like you're like someone could make an adobo. That one person's like, oh, they'd make a really good one. It can change like every other time. So they're not there's not like some like consistency on that one. But again, I'm very happy about just the overall presence of Filipino owned restaurants in the area, just because it can expose a lot of other communities to our culture. Because the one thing that I like to say is that the one thing to really connect with someone is either through their language or their food. And let's just go through it later because Filipino food is amazing. And I believe it's on the come up. Like Brian, you mentioned that it's going to take a little bit, but I think it's here. I think we're going to see that rise because Trader Joe's has that ube mochi that everyone's been loving, and there's like ube lattes and ube this. So I'm like,
No,
all right,
I was more so like saying that like 10 years ago. It just
all
a
right,
couple adjustments, it's gonna hit the mainstream, and then now it's having its moment. So I agree with you.
yeah, exactly. And then I see on the cooking shows, I see like someone making adobo. I mean, personally, I mean, they put like different ingredients in it, but at least it's like, at least they know what adobo is to share it with people. But I'm just only optimistic about the future here.
And it says a lot too. We don't like Filipinos aren't just accountants, nurses, engineers. Like they can be chefs, they can be restaurant owners, they can do different things. And so because now we're breaking into those different industries that aren't like career secure, it'll be interesting to see what our future generations look like in terms of like their professional ventures.
I do also want to add as well that in terms of this divisiveness within our community and looking towards the future, it's not even just looking here in the US, but even looking at the Philippines as well. Because being there last week really taught me, besides the huge difference of even the different ways we think as well. So, like, what the same problems we have here of like tearing each other down are still over there as well. And so it causes me to think about, we have the privilege to be here on Instagram Live and Zoom and have these conversations. But when I'm over there in the Philippines and I was trying to have them, a lot of the responses I was getting is, oh, we don't really think about that because all we think about is survival. And
Very
so it
interesting.
kind yeah, because it's that survival mindset, um, it causes me to think about of how us as Phil Ams are making sure that we are continually creating not just the intergenerational dialogue that Brian was talking about, but that cross-cultural dialogue where we can help our own folks abroad come to terms with their own identity as well. Because if we are just healing it here and talking about DEIA and creating ethnic enclaves of safety in the US, but we're not doing it elsewhere, what exactly is that pinnacle of American exceptionalism that we keep tooting of DEIA here in the US really doing towards the world when we see it from outside in? And so, since this is all out on social media and everyone, I just would love to do the call to action and charge for everyone listening, especially in the FYP community or just Philam community of, again, let's not just keep the conversation here online. Let's not keep it in the Phil Am perspective, but bleed it into other communities as well. When we go home, challenge our family members to expand their thinking away in order for them to have that collective healing as well, so that one day their own generations as well, if they choose to immigrate, can also feel that same healing that we have felt here.
Y'all just keep dropping all these gems, and we are coming up on an hour already. Like it's already been an hour. So I don't want to keep you over the hour unless you're willing to talk a little bit more. But oh my gosh, there are things that you said. Gosh, American exceptionalism. I have a lot of feelings about that right now. We don't want to talk about what American exceptionalism. Those are ideas that I think we internalized as a colonized people, and that, but also that. Oh, hello. Wait a second. It looks like. Oh no, are we still streaming?
I'm
It says
here.
that we're disconnected. Oh no.
No, you have us here.
Yeah, no, but I think we stopped streaming to Insta. It looks like for whatever reason, it's not posting, but that's fine because I have it on Zoom and the full conversation will be put in the feed. So and this is my daughter Mal. Can you say hi?
Hello.
I forgot to mention she was home. She had a half day, so she's here and she may jump in and out of the call, but
Hi there.
say
I like
hi.
your shirt.
You like your shirt?
I am Groot.
I am Groot. Okay, I'm almost finished. Okay. Thanks. She's wearing a little Mandalorian necklace too. I think it's so funny.
May the fourth-
Family
May
of
the fourth.
nerds. But you know, in terms of what I really, God, food is the great equalizer. I wrote that down while you were speaking, Brian. Like, you know, and Gerren, when you were talking about the food and the way that it's changing and how Filipinos have their moment, like we really do. We are at a cusp, I think. We are at a moment in history where it is actually up to us, like the three of you on this call and the work that you are doing within the community and making space for people to very openly embrace their Filipino identity and doing that publicly and inviting all the other cultures in to witness that, like that is fortifying our sense of culture and our sense of nation, because that, I think, there are 4.4 million Filipinos in America. We are the third largest AAPI demographic in America, according to that census. And we are not represented in anything, right? Like we don't have representation in government, even though there's so many Filipinos in California. Like there are very few Filipino representatives. There's very few Filipino representation on film and television. And we as a people, just in terms of numbers, I think the need for representation is so palpable. It is so necessary. And I really finally feel like we're getting to the point where there are enough of us who believe that and who are trying to work towards ensuring that the representation that we receive is by us for everyone. And that's really like, that's the key. Like I'm tired of Filipino stories or Filipino history being told through a white lens or through the American lens. I want Filipino Americans to own those stories. I want, but I also want Filipino Americans to own the opportunity to say, I grew up here in America eating barbecue. So if I want to make my Filipino food with barbecue flavors, I can do that because it's actually who I am. Like if what we are asking is for people as for human beings, artists, creatives, human beings to bring their authentic selves forward, why shouldn't a Filipino American bring their authentic self forward? And that's a blending of cultures already. Like, and so you making space for that is massive. But I just wanna say that like I loved what you brought up about the cultural differences between the Philippines, between the motherland and between Filipino Americans, and how there's so many things that we talk about in the film that you all brought up. And I can't wait for you to see it. Like, I can't wait for you to come. You all have to come to the premiere. You have to, like, because I really want to know what you think. And they're probably going to be snippets of this interview in the film because it backs up a lot of the things that we said. And that these are issues that not just the immigrants have dealt with: invisibility, racism, you know, the being in between cultures, that is something that is continuing down to all Filipinos who are born here, right? Even my children experience that. And they're mixed, but they're very Filipino. They may be white presenting, but I dare a Filipino to tell them that they're not allowed to be Filipino. I dare them, because that is not something I will tolerate. My children are Filipino. You know, so like that idea of gatekeeping and that idea of embracing of cultures, if we are not reaching back, not just to help uplift the Filipinos, but to also touch our culture, where we came from, so that we can understand how to embody who we are more here. Like there's a reciprocity that comes with increasing that dialogue. And I love that you said it. And I love that we're going to have that You know, I'm not sure what pieces are going to be in this film, but like we already have you in the film because you let us film Randy and you know, you mentioned Rodney and Mikey, you know, all of their work with FYP and at GW as well. Like I have footage of that was already going to be in the film. So it was really important to me to also get the three of you here to talk about your work in FYP, because those three men, and we'll have their photograph in the film, you're the next three, you know, like, and to see that there are Filipinos who are willingly taking on the mantle of uplifting our culture, of unifying our culture, of creating solidarity with other cultures and with the motherland, I think is something that will make the elders very proud. And I think is something that is necessary for the people who are coming up behind you. Like y'all are really, you're doing amazing work. And I don't know if people tell you that enough, but like, I'm very grateful for the work that you do. And I'm very grateful that you shared it with us today. The hour just flew by. Like it flew by.
Thank you.
Definitely. And thank you. I know for me, we were so grateful for you to be at our event, because I think one thing here at FYP, I know Brian mentioned it too, is that with the Phil-Am identity, there is so many also career stereotypes where our families tell us, to make our immigration story worth it, please go into nursing, please be a lawyer, go into tech, or do something that can make a livelihood. But I think what again makes us Filipino amazing is that by making their immigration worth it, they're also giving us the power of choice that they did through love. And in order to create a community of love, we need to make sure that we are using that choice to break their own generational trauma, fear that we won't be able to amount to anything, but to show that if we follow our passions, that we can amount to something that will allow them to be proud that again their difficulties made something. So that one event that you attended for our career event, that was really our huge intention, to show people that again, you do not have to be the stereotypical Phil-Am career, but you can explore who you are. And I for one, just hope to continue that in FYP, that although we may be in leadership for a short time, that our successors in FYP remember that being Filipino Young Professionals in DC, and we are here to create a community of love and remind ourselves that our family's immigration gave us this opportunity to love them back and make their dreams come true of having a choice.
Do we need a plug for FYP DC before we sign off?
Go plug, Mr. VP and
No.
Press.
I'll leave this up to Gerren.
All right. So, you know, thank you, Regina, for having us today. It was a huge honor, and we are very excited to watch your documentary. But after this plug, I'd be happy to learn more about how we can watch that all together. But yeah, so feel free to follow us on Instagram at FYPDC. We also have our website currently being always revamped about all the updates, all the collaborations that we do with other orgs at www.fypdc.org. And we also have an upcoming social happy hour for AAPI month, NHPI month. And it's a long acronym this time around, but yeah, we're partnering up with a lot of you know, Asian-led organizations in DC for a happy hour at Luna Hall. That's going to be on May 13th, the Monday, and sponsored by Gore Soju. So feel free to come by if you want a free soju tasting and some performances and good music and some good food.
All right, amazing. Yes, a round of applause. Thank you. Gerren, Brian, Gabe, your leadership, your welcoming me into the meetings, your activism, your online presence, just the social events, the cultural events that you're doing, the opportunities for connection and networking are so important. It's not something that I had accessible to me. And I think when I was coming up, I felt because I'm a creative that I wouldn't fit into Filipino Young Professionals because of that idea that like professional means what? But yes, we have chefs. We have costume designers who are nominated and have won Tonys. We have musicians. We are a very, very talented people, and we occupy almost every industry. And the world would literally stop if all the Filipinos decided to go back to the Philippines and not caregive or play music on cruise ships or steer cruise ships. We are a very intelligent, resilient, we have a lot of grit. We are able to actually do the work. And I think I think the work right now of us, of your generation and my generation and Randy, is to uplift each other and to create a more cohesive identity so that there isn't so much infighting, because we only get to move forward together. Byron Atienza, who was on my call on Wednesday, that I forgot to push the record button for, which was like, I lost so much. It was such a great conversation. He said, the future is Filipino. And I love that, because it's true. We're already embedded in every industry. So what you're doing, nurturing young professionals, it's really, really important work. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you to all of our viewers for joining us today and for watching this, and as it streams later. Follow FYP DC on Insta, go to their events, and keep in tune for updates about Faith Healers. We're running our crowdfunding campaign right now. We are at 61%. The community is really, really showing up. We have 8 days left. I'm so I'm humbled every single time I see a donation. I'm humbled and honored, because people are supporting us capturing American history about a very specific community, but really is a microcosm for how Filipinos function all around the globe. So, your contributions and your support mean the world to me. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, Regina, for having us.